growing up, what your family life was like, where you grew up, stuff like that.
So my grandparents are Greek immigrants that ended up in Idaho. So I have parents, both sets, born and raised here. But I have a twin. In the early 60s, my dad was in the army as an officer stationed in Greece. And my twin sister and I have a unique background. We were born on actually Greek soil in the Athens, where my family comes from. So we hold dual citizenship. So the first formative years was spent in Europe and Greece specifically. And then my dad went to Chicago. And we were in Chicago for a period of time while he worked Army intelligence. And then he retired and took a federal government job in the Bay Area, San Francisco. And we moved out there in the 60s. And my formative years were spent in the Bay Area.
Can you describe a little bit of?
So there's a little bit of a background, right? It's very interesting, right? Now she's going to describe that little Bay Area experience and how her father continued to work for Paul Tate in retirement.
There in the 60s. And my formative years were spent in the Bay Area.
Can you describe?
Oops, that's not the right clip. I apologize. What are your thoughts on that while I find this other clip?
Man, honestly, whenever, I just think at this point, dude, when you have Howard Hughes so deeply involved with what was going on with the Manson family as well, by the way, I think that's very important to point out, especially in considering the fact that Howard Hughes was kind of tasked with providing the plausible deniability by Nixon himself when he was VP back, before he was actually. It's interesting because he was tasked with kind of providing the intelligence apparatus at the time with the domestic black sites in right within the U.S. where they could train up the Cuban exiles,
for sure.
Right? Yeah,
Heidi Love and I have done a couple shows on this topic, and I don't want to divulge too much in this conversation that she and I have planned coming up for next week. But Howard Hughes appears to be a member of the Society of the Cincinnati.
My
appears
God,
to have been
hilarious. I know.
So, and him and Bill Colby link up for that Glomar incident. You know, the famous Glomar disclosure, right?
Oh my God, that's what. Oh,
Colby and Hughes were involved in that one.
I can neither confirm nor deny, my friend.
There you go. And that we can thank Howard Hughes and Bill Colby, both very likely members of the Society of Cincinnati.
Wow. Now
and on that note, let's listen to another member of the Society of Cincinnati's former protege's daughter, Paul Tate, descendant of Lieutenant Jesse Tate, Virginia chapter of the Society of Cincinnati in the Wars of 1776. Very likely that 8.5-month-old boy in Sharon Tate's belly that was murdered as well was, in fact, the only paternal descendant of Paul Tate to take hereditary membership in that group. Because he had 3 daughters, 2 were dead, 1 had a daughter. So unless that 40-year-old granddaughter starts pumping out boys, there's 1 less member of the society.
My God.
There in the 60s. And my formative years were spent in the Bay Area.
Can you describe a little bit about how your parents were, how they raised you?
So my dad was very strict. He was an Army officer, was in World War II in the Korean conflict, and would have gone to Vietnam. But my mom had didn't really want him going to Vietnam. He'd spent enough time away from home, 28 years. And I have a twin, like I told you, that we were young kids, but we had teenage siblings. And she said, basically, you've already served your country 28 years. I would rather you come home and start in basically coming home every night from work. So this is what happens. In the 60s, he decides to retire, but he takes a government job, a top secret clearance job. She didn't like that he was gone all the time. We moved to the Bay Area, and his top secret clearance job took him away from the house 3 weeks out of every month. So I was raised by my mom, and my dad would come home. He was the provider, but he was a father figure provider, and then he was gone, right? So my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and we were fortunate. We had a very caring mom.
Would it be fair to say that you grew up in the Bay Area then?
Yes, that's what formative years up until the time we were 12. And then we moved to Boise, Idaho in 1974. And
what
are your thoughts there, sir? Pretty wild stuff, right?
I smell. Hey, can we play Spot the Spook? I think
right.
that right. It's just so crazy. I think, by the way, whenever I did do my Pilgrim Society episode, it's so funny to me that members of we've just been consistently speaking about people such as Henry Kissinger and Alexander Haig, right? And these strange usual suspects that continue to kind of prop up their sort of like what's interesting. You just consistently see them resurfacing in terms of this overall overarching enterprise. And that's why I think it's crazy, because apparently both of them are connected to greenlighting the CIA's Gladio network with Licio Gelli belly at the time, and in 74, I believe. He's essentially a financier, right? Who's serving as a liaison at with Nazi Germany, and essentially that's how a lot of the rat lines were staged in certain ways. But what I don't think people realized is that you have the P2 Masonic Lodge heavily involved. You also have as far as like these secret meetings at the U.S. embassies in Rome that were taking place at this specifically at this time when Alexander Haig, who's a member of the Knights of Malta, right, and formerly he was formerly the NATO Supreme Commander as well, which I think is very important because he becomes President Nixon's White House chief of staff, and that's all during when Watergate.
He's the one who helps frame him up, right? He's the one recording shit, right?
Yes, man. Yeah, and it comes down to the fact that it was Haig who essentially, provided. It was he and Bernstein, right? Who's Office of Naval Intelligence, right? Who provide, they provide the Watergate Committee with, hey, you need to talk to John Dean, who's the only motherfucker who's going to be able to sell the, the false, as far as eliminate the CIA defense strategy, which they were attempting to pursue at the beginning because E. Howard Hunt was on the outside looking in. That's why they killed his wife, right? That's why Dorothy Hunt was murdered in that plane crash. She legitimately was she was the pay mistress who was, running cash to these various, alleged perpetrators and burglars for Watergate at the time. And it's very interesting because she's paying off the surveillance company and the individual who's running the surveillance company that provided James McCord with, the wiretap monitors that he needed, or wiretap surveillance equipment that he needed to rig up the Watergate facility. And so
and who was the CIA director during all of this?
Richard Helms, baby. And what does Richard Helms do? He orders the direct destruction of thousands of files, right? CIA files.
And Tricky Dick threatens him on them tapes saying, we know who killed Jack, right? So
who killed?
And then he talks about that payoff to E. Howard Hunt with that money that Dorothy Hunt crashed at Midway Airport there in Chicago. Oops. He talks about story, we got to pay Hunt off because of that whole Bay of Pigs thing. He's going to spill the beans on that whole Bay of Pigs thing.
Because he's up 40. They knew this all day long.
I love that quote too. The whole Bay of Pigs thing. Tricky Dick's a real. He's a lot of things. Comedy, he was not, but we also see everyone get fired out of this. We see Bill Colby come in as the CIA director, right? So all these programs we're discussing really come into an epicenter in American homeland at this time, and we see Bill Colby's departure. When Gerald Ford fires his ass and everybody else after the September 1975 incidents where two Manson girls 3 weeks, I didn't mean to do that. Two Manson girls 3 weeks apart in September of 1975 in California tried to kill Gerald Ford. And he's like, oh, weird. So Nelson Rockefeller, the guy that's got his hand up, Henry Kissinger's butt making his mouth move. He almost became an unelected president of the United States if it weren't for Bill Colby, and his queers failing on their mission here to murk Ford out there in California twice.
Yeah, Jesus, who is Deep Throat? I think, dude.
They all are, if you ask me, sir. So if you look at that situation, that gets real processing pretty fast. So we hear about Deep Throat in the media the same time Sonny Franchise's financing the pornography Deep Throat starring Processi and Linda Lovelace, who likes to have sex on film with German Shepherds. Different story altogether. But we see Sonny Franchise, the underboss for the Colombo crime family, financing that film, and then it premieres at a Process Church Theater in West Hollywood, the Pussycat Theaters. As per the files of Ed Sanders, those owners were connected to the Process, and as per public reports, Sonny Franchise was financing that film. So it gets real weird. Because that goes back to Bob Cocaine Evans, because he's the one who produced The Godfather with the Colombo crime family.
Jesus, dude, I know that. It's just like the Deep Throat connection to it all was clearly just like an attempted misdirection as well, because I think it was kind of like a layered. You had multiple individuals. It was really like a a fabricated source, when in reality it was multiple people who were providing tips. But still, you have Woodward himself, who was sent there on behalf of Alexander Haig. And if you read Lynn Kolodny's book Silent Coup, it effectively describes Woodward as sort of Alexander Haig's cat's paw, where he's doing the bidding, effectively doing the bidding of and by the way, I think it's really important to understand the fact that Donald Graham, who's running the so during the time that Woodward and Bernstein are sort of, in the works with the Post, providing this false narrative to the public, in my mind, and laying the groundwork for how the public would interpret this scandal.
Sure,
you have
that's important.
Donald
Got to get the
Graham.
propaganda right.
Exactly. And so you have Donald Graham running the Washington Post throughout the 50s and directly assisting the CIA during Operation Mockingbird. And he flooded the staff of the Washington Post with intelligence agents. And that included this individual, a journalist by the name of Ben Bradley, who this guy, he's responsible.
Editor, right? Editor of the Washington Post for years, right?
Yep. And he's directly responsible for urging Woodward and Bernstein, for urging them on in that effort to create this story and help bring down the Nixon administration. And Bradley, of course, he shows up a little bit later, being entirely responsible for aiding the media cover up as far as countering the disclosures of Henry Vincent's gay escort service, and it's so crazy. This was all being uncovered by, right? And it's all being uncovered by members of journalists at the Washington Times at that point. And it turns out that they would, and all of that.
And by the Moonies. Exactly.
And they're running this counter propaganda operation, attempting to seed this narrative. And so just to me, I find in no way, I mean, this is all deliberate, and especially considering when you have, Woodward is directly responsible for providing the Watergate committee with the notion they needed to ask for this taping system. They wouldn't have had prior knowledge of this taping system if it wasn't for Alexander Haig and if it wasn't for Bob Woodward. And so when you know that Bob Woodward is running, covert intelligence while he's working for the Office of Naval Intelligence at the time, like, man, he was, honestly, it's too much for people to not recognize the Maura Radford spy scandal and affair that happened, which was basically, they were spying on the Nixon administration from within. And you had Joint Chiefs of Staff who were like accumulating, like, it was very, very interesting. But I think Watergate's one of the most extraordinary.
Big time, dude. But it's the same network we're talking about. It's these ongoing enterprises, right?
100%, buddy. And that's why I think it's one of the most, fascinating aspects of it. Yeah, oh, no, you're good, buddy. The only thing I had left to say was basically that, Alexander Haig.
I got a slight delay going.